Welcome to the Indeed Knowledge Series, video interviews on evidence-based evaluation, evidence-based policy, and evidence-based practice in the preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization fields. My name is Kai Brand Jacobson from the Indeed Project, and I'm very glad to be joined today by Fenna Keijzer and Maarten van de Donk. Fenna and Maarten are both senior advisors with RadarAdvies and have worked extensively with the Radicalization Awareness Network, as well as working directly in the field of radicalization and polarization in the Netherlands, specifically with exit programs and across Europe. Fenna, Maarten, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
It's a
Good
pleasure.
morning, you shouldn't say.
Now, our topic today is going to be focusing on socializing the RAN peer and self-review manual for exit work, which you both were deeply involved in. We're also going to focus on how to evaluate your own organization, looking as well at self and peer review, learning from evaluation, and a phrase that I very much appreciated that you shared with us, how to avoid evaluation panic, and understanding a bit more what that is and what are some of the things that can be done to avoid it. But to get us started, could you tell us a little bit about the RAN peer and self-review manual for exit work?
Well, the manual we made in 2019, it was published in 2020. And what we tried to do was, there was a need in the field of especially exit programs, how to work on evaluation. Evaluation in the whole field of P and CVE is still quite young. And people were asking how to do this, and also asking themselves, how could we do this with limited budget? And how can we do this perhaps ourselves? Because what we saw quite often was that there either was no evaluation or there was evaluation from the outside. And that had some restrictions. For example, that the people who did do these evaluations were not specialized into that field, or they were doing this evaluation with other goals than the exit facilities actually were aiming for. So more like, should we continue financing? Is it politically defendable to spend money on it, and not for how could we improve our work? And that was really the needs of the exit facilities we spoke to. How can we improve our work? How do we know that our work matters and that we are doing a good thing to society?
And then maybe to add to that, self and peer review is not necessarily new, but we saw that in the field of exit work, there wasn't really a tool on self and peer review that was specifically focused on the topics that exit work is focusing on, and in the language that practitioners who work in exit facilities are speaking in, so to say. So that's why we aimed for this manual.
Fenna, thank you for adding that aspect, because Maarten, you mentioned that in the PCVE and de-radicalization field, evaluation is still somewhat new. We've seen a significant increase in the last 10 years, especially in Europe. But from what we have seen across Europe, engaging with law enforcement agencies, local and national government authorities, non-governmental organizations, and others, is that still a substantial amount of the work that is being done is not actually evaluated. Now, we've been looking with practitioner agencies and organizations at understanding the importance of evaluation and how it can help, but the awareness of different types of evaluation is still somewhat limited. So, Fenna, you mentioned that self and peer evaluation and self and peer review are not new, but I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about them so that those who are hearing about them for the first time can understand what these approaches are and how they can be useful for agencies in the field.
Yes, of course. So peer review is, of course, not new and something that is used in the academic world a lot already. But the essence of peer review, I think, is that experts, situation experts from outside the exit facility, take a look at the work of the other exit facility. So basically, people that know what they are talking about are having a look at the work. For self-review, I think it's more within the exit facility itself, and people reflect on their own work. So that's a bit the difference between the two, and both really have an added value. While it's not a real external evaluation conducted by an external institution, for example, but it does have added value for internal reflection, for example.
So with peer review, we're looking at professionals who are experts on the topic, experts in the field, possibly, for example, from other exit organizations, who then bring an outside lens, but one that is still informed by rich experience in the field, and self-review, a set of practices where practitioners, where agencies themselves can use evaluative practices to help support learning, identify lessons, see areas to improve, but drawing upon expertise and experience that is within the agency or organization itself.
Exactly, that's it.
Yes.
All right.
And sometimes peer review also can be done by experts who are working in a related or adjacent field. Like, for example, if you would have people who are working with cults or if with gang members, then there is a lot of commonalities when it comes to methods and so on. So they also could be peers. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that sometimes in countries there's only one exit program, so then it's very hard to find a peer. So then if you have to choose either for a foreign one, which can have some language barriers or legal barriers or other kind of circumstances, or you can choose for a local one, but then you have to look in an adjacent field who is similar to us.
Thank you, Maarten. Now, you were describing the development of the manual and brief, and what I would like to ask is, from the time it was created until now, I'm imagining that you've had the opportunity to work with some agencies, work with practitioners, see the manual in use. What do you feel are some of the key values that it can bring for agencies and those involved in exit work? Why can this manual be helpful and important to them? And together with that, what are some of the values or benefits which evaluating our work in the exit field can have for agencies and practitioners?
I think what it offers the people is involved is a kind of framework. Because if you do self-evaluation, you shouldn't be either too self-critical or to be too much self-comforting. And if you are working in this with a team or with the peers, you also need to build a safe environment to do the evaluation. Because if you are not showing your weakness, your colleagues are most likely also not to show their weaknesses. So you have to be very clear in advance, where is this evaluation about? What are our objectives? How are we going to deal with people showing their uncertainties? And also what will happen after we have scraped together the results, so that people also know that if you, for example, admit that you have difficulties with some one person or with some specific problems, that this will not be resulting in the end in that you will have a prolongation of your contract or things like this. So what we are trying to offer with the manual is a kind of step-by-step guide where you build in all these certainties and create this safety and make it a kind of structured process to really get the right discussion, and also when the outcome is there to implement this in the right way.
And I think to add to that, so if you have this safe environment and the direction you want to go with this review is clear for everyone, so there's common ground and it's future oriented, then you have a safe space to, in the end, for a peer review, for example, to prevent groupthink in your own organization, but really get that outside-in perspective. And really get new inspiration, tips, innovative ideas from others in your organization. So if you do this the right way, it has added value in that way.
And then really makes the review and the evaluation hands-on. You're getting actual tips, reflections, insights, which can be directly applied in programming and practice.
Exactly. And the same goes for self-evaluation. Then you don't get these ideas from others outside of the organization, but you do raise awareness about the importance of improving and innovating, and everybody has the ability to take a step back, think about what can we do better, where there is room for innovation, and in this way, you provide a structured way of doing that.
For those who are joining us on the webinar version of this recording, we're going to be providing the links to the manual so that you can see it directly yourselves, both in the description and the comments section. Also, you'll be able to see it in the video and online at the end as well. For those who are joining us in the podcast version, we're going to include the links to the manual in the description of the podcast, as well as in comments sections for those who would like to access it directly there. Maarten, you mentioned using outcomes from the evaluation, and I know that you've focused a lot on learning from evaluation. Could you talk us through a little bit, once evaluations are done or in the process of evaluation and at the completion of the evaluation, when you have the evaluation outcomes, what are some of the things we can do to help improve the actual using these results and learning from results of evaluation so that they can support the work of practitioners and agencies in the field?
I think up and foremost, it's important at the start of the review you are doing is to have your management on board, because if you are not allowed to change anything after you have done the evaluation, it will not work. And the same actually also is when there is a commissioning party, you need to have a kind of support for the fact that something might change after an evaluation, because otherwise you'll never have the chance to implement. And I think what then is important during the review is, in the beginning, you mostly get all kinds of wild ideas, what is going well, what is going not so well. And then you will have to start looking for what are solutions for this and what are feasible solutions. And we really like to work there with the theory of change, because that actually structures this discussion. You first have an idea, or you have a problem, or you have a dilemma, and then by looking over literature or by discussing with each other, you come to an assumption that this can be a solution. And if everyone agrees on this, if there is consent about this, this makes it easier to implement. And then I think the most important thing, and this is what we see quite a bit as also as RadarAdvies in a more broader sense, also apart from radicalization, we see very often that people think that the end of the evaluation is the delivery of the report or the delivery of the paper. But actually, this is where it starts. You need to have a kind of working program. How are we going to implement? You have to have someone responsible in your organization who is sometimes looking at it. And what you can even do, but that's up, we leave it up to that. We put it in the manual. For self-review, it's even possible to say, well, let's do this. Let's say once every 2 years, we do this process. We then make a program, and after 2 years, we pick it up from, we then had those ideas. How did we implement it? And what is the current situation? Because as we all know, in radicalization and violent extremism, developments are going so fast. And so also how we have to relate to our clients. So that can also keep it more up to date.
I'm so glad you mentioned those points, and I wanted to hone in on a few key aspects that you spoke to. So when beginning your evaluation process, making sure that you have management and leadership support, and you could also do a strategic mapping of stakeholders in an organization and agency to look at whose support or whose buy-on will be needed when there are recommendations, when there is learning that comes up, to be able to make sure that you can take those forward. But also the aspect you said, for much of the field, for many years, we've looked at evaluation as a process where you identify the need for an evaluation, and sometimes that might be an external donor or government funding mechanism or leadership in an agency that says an evaluation is needed. The evaluation is done and an evaluation report is produced, and that has very often been seen as the entirety of the process, and that when that evaluation report is done, that is the completion or the end point of it. You said that's when it begins. So the report is done, identification of lessons or issues that need to be addressed is brought up through the evaluation, but that's really then when the process needs to begin, looking at how do we take that forward and how do we implement the change that should come about as a result of the evaluation. Can you take us through that a little bit more, some of the models or how you address that within the manual? What can agencies do? What can practitioners do when going through that process to then work to implement lessons or recommendations and changes that are identified from the evaluation?
Yeah, so what we, for example, included is basically the end of the evaluation, aka the start of the rest of the process. Yeah, what is important there is to include all the participants that participated in the discussion on the way forward, to make sure that there's a common ground and agreeing on what is next. So points of discussion in this conversation could be, for example, what should be the priorities of all the things we discussed? What should happen? So what are the actions that we're going to take? Who is the owner of these actions? It doesn't need to be all the same owners, of course. It can be different people, but it has to be clear that who is going to carry out, or at least keeps on taking a look at these actions. And then, of course, it's important to have a discussion on, who are the key stakeholders? Is there enough time? Is there enough money to do this, to make sure that this is actually going to happen? So to make a really clear timeline of who is doing what and when, basically. So this is something that we included in the manual as well. I don't know if you have to add anything to that, Maarten.
No, I think these are the main components. And also, I think accepting that some of the things you think of during an evaluation and make points for improvement, that in practice this will not work immediately. And how you're going to deal with this. Are we going to give it a second chance? Or if it becomes clear that one of the assumptions look great on paper, but not in practice, what are you going to do with it? Also, to keep people enthusiastic about innovation, that innovation is not that you say goodbye to someone old and you have something new, and that you have to stick at it at all price.
You've spoken a bit about stakeholders and having stakeholders involved, which is one of the things that we see is critical, both for doing a good evaluation, making sure that you've mapped and identified who are the stakeholders that you need to reach, who are the stakeholders we need to engage with to understand the program or initiative that's being evaluated, but also the importance of stakeholder enthusiasm and stakeholder engagement when you're then working to bring forward recommendations and achieve change. And this has sometimes been one of the sticking points and one of the areas where a certain culture has developed in the field, which is a culture of skepticism towards evaluation. Evaluations are done, people take part, but they don't see what happens after, what changes afterwards. And with your focus on learning from and utilizing the results of evaluation and building that into, for example, work plans, or we see some agencies create actually change management processes coming from the evaluation. So they identify learnings and then they look at what can we implement. And Maarten, as you said, sometimes some of that can be done quite quickly. It may be changes that are not having a cost impact, changes that we can implement quite easily once we've come to an understanding and recognition that it's important. But sometimes those are changes that might require decisions by management and leadership, and changes that can require engagement from a range of stakeholders, and it takes time to implement them. When you are working with agencies and organizations, how do you convince them that taking this time is important, taking the time for evaluation, taking the time to make these changes? What are the benefits and what are the arguments that could convince practitioners and convince management and leadership in exit programs and in the field more widely? Why should they be doing evaluation? What is the value that it can bring to their work and to the programs that we're involved in?
I think that for the field itself, it's not so hard to convince, because people know that when you are working on radicalized people, this is not an easy target group. And a lot of people have experience in therapy with other vulnerable groups or other kind. They know that we are working on long-term developments, and also that we're sometimes doing prevention where success is not immediately measurable and it will only come in a few years. It's often harder to convince people who are commissioning, and especially, a politician is under pressure because the people in the street want him to solve a problem now. And then our message to them is, we're now starting with a program which takes a few years with the clients, and we can only measure impact after a certain time. But what we have been working on, and I see also positive developments in this in a lot of places, is that people start to accept that working with radicalized people is not a thing of only of today, but that it is a thing which needs a sustainable approach. And that for them, it is important that if the question comes, for example, to a politician after an attack, why do you spend so much money on this exit program, that he at least can tell what is happening in there. And this is also what in the past was very often not very really clear. And in this sense, I think that evaluation is really important, and also having a good theory of change to be clear about this is what we are doing. And if you are able to tell this in a good way, and also how people are working on their own quality management, it's easier to explain why we cannot help all the people, because that is, of course, a kind of fata morgana we are hunting for. If we say that we can help all radicalized persons and that all attacks in the future will be prevented, because that's not true. But if something happens, you need to have a sound story about this is what we have been doing with these people. These are the methods, these are the assumptions, and this is how our dedicated professionals work in it.
Yeah, exactly. And also then evaluation does not only bring all the points that need to be improved, but it also gives you the ability as a practitioner and as an organization to show what works well and why and how. So in that way, it's easier to explain what you are doing and also what works well and why you are successful in some things.
So evaluation can help us as organizations, as agencies and practitioners in the field to learn from what we're doing, to be able to identify and test to see what is working, what isn't working, and why and how. But it also, from what you're saying, can play an incredibly important role in building up a body of evidence that we can learn from as a field, but also evidence that can help when engaging with politicians and policymakers to be able to provide that proof and answer those questions for why are we using this approach or a different approach. In the Indeed project, we're focusing very much on the development of tools and learning in the field for evidence-based evaluation. But the reason for that is to really look at how we build up a base as well for evidence-based practice and evidence-based policymaking, and being able to bring to politicians and policymakers actual evidence gathered from programs and interventions, and to look at what is the proof, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what impact can these programs have, and also what is the kind of support that they need. And what have we learned from when doing these programs about factors that can contribute to making programs work more effectively, as well as some of the conditions and factors that sometimes might make it difficult and might mean that a program doesn't succeed even from the beginning because it may not have enough support, or it may not link with work being done by other actors and sectors in the field. So all of these together helping to strengthen and improve the work that we're doing in the PCV field. Now, you have described and spoken about this phenomena of evaluation panic that can sometimes set in. And we have seen that there is at times a reticence towards evaluation within the field. Can you tell us a little bit, what do you mean by evaluation panic?
If you just sent around an email on a certain day that external people are coming in to evaluate your work without putting any context to it, that's making people unsure. That's making people panic. Why are you doing this? What is the objective? What can be the possible consequences for me? Will I ever get, and you earlier mentioned this, also get some results back from this? Or is it going into a black box, which at a certain day will cross my way again, but then perhaps in an unpleasant way? So we see a lot of uncertainties. And so in this sense, self-review already is a safer part, because you then really can work together on, and it's clearer why you are doing this, because it's much more transparent. And also with peer review. So it's already in the method, you are avoiding panic, but even then you still have to be very clear about the objectives, about what it might cause, but especially also it should be about enthusiasm. It should be about how can we improve our work. And an evaluation should be about how can we be more proud of our work. That should be the main objective. But very often we see, what are you doing in my field? And I don't want to lose my job. And these are very sincere feelings. And I also do understand them fully. But I think also in the same time, if you approach practitioners in the right way, they are really open to set those prejudice or panic aside and collaborate very well. We even as external evaluators, what we also do in the Netherlands, have seen that if we work on a nice way and on a very constructive way with the practitioners and showing them that we understand what their problems are, is that you have much less panic than you would have normally.
Mm. Thank you, Maarten. Fenna, anything you'd want to add there as well?
No, very convincing already. No, but I think you're right. Also for external evaluations, it helps if the evaluators know what the work is about and what the field is about. And in that way, you work together much better with both the commissioning bodies, but also the practitioners. So to make it not three separate actors, so to say, but yeah, one whole.
And that's one of the things that has really been clearly identified in the field. And you actually touched upon this earlier as well, the importance of having evaluators who have real expertise and knowledge and understanding of the issues. And that can either be someone that's coming from the same area of programming, or Maarten, as you mentioned, sometimes in a country, you may only have one agency or institution really leading on the exit programs. So it can also be helpful to have people that are working from within the PCV field, but perhaps from a related area, perhaps youth work more broadly, or looking at social interventions and programming, education programming, but that they have an actual depth of understanding and expertise on the topic area that the evaluation is being conducted on as well. I would imagine also from what you've said that self and peer evaluation can not only be sometimes a more appropriate approach to evaluation, fitting the needs of an agency and organization, can also sometimes be lower cost than bringing in an external evaluator, and maybe something that can actually be built into the way of work and the practices and processes of the organization or agency. Also in countries and cities where we have multi-stakeholder forums, either smart hubs or joint operating centers or platforms that bring together agencies and organizations from different sectors in the field, that can lend itself to peer review, where you can invite in a sister or partner organization or experts that have an understanding of the field, an understanding of your work, and help you to reflect and think through the work that's being done. But I would imagine also that agencies and organizations practicing self and peer evaluation and review, that can actually build up a practice and a culture of evaluation, and build up evidence throughout the work of a program, that if they then did choose to work with external evaluators, either bringing in an external evaluator or having a mixed team approach, that also means that you have a lot more information that has been gathered that could be useful to inform better external evaluation as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you have already, you lay already the ground for external evaluations if you do it this way, because you gathered a lot of data, documents you perhaps needed to share with each other already. So in that way, there's a lot of information already available.
Yes, and I think it's also good to make the remark here today is that peer and self-review is not too fit for every situation. For example, if you really want to have an effect evaluation, it's harder for you to do this yourself, because then you get the idea of that the butcher is controlling his own meat, and so then it might be better to have an external evaluator, or at least having an external evaluator in perhaps your self process, so you can also combine this. You're very right. I think it's also very important what we have seen during self-evaluations, that often also can lower thresholds, because you are also can convince people why certain data need to be collected, because you are working with them themselves. And very often now people get are being obliged to collect all kinds of data for later evaluation, but they don't see what happens with the evaluation.
Mm.
So if you say upfront, we want to improve this, we're going to collect this data, and later we're going to look at this data to see if something happened to the positive or to the negative, then it's a clear process and people are willing to write things down. But if it's only writing information into this black box again and not knowing what's going to happen. People will be less enthusiastic mostly.
The RAN Peer and Self-Review Manual for Exit Work really was a milestone and a significant step forward in the field. It's a tool that can be useful for agencies and organizations that are trying to explore what evaluation approach might be appropriate for you. It's also quite a useful resource to have for those that are practicing evaluation in the field, to be able to bring a wider range of approaches that might benefit the agencies and organizations you're working with. Fenna, Maarten, in our last moments, I'd like to ask you for any tips and tricks and do's and don'ts. If you're looking at implementing self and peer review for agencies working in the exit field or in others in the PCV field, are there some things that through your work you identified these are really key to doing it well? These are 2 or 3 things that are important to pay attention to. And are there some things which we can learn from lessons that doing this can sometimes really make the process go wrong, can be damaging, or can sometimes create challenges in the experience of doing a self or peer review? So what are some of the tips and tricks you might have for agencies, practitioners, and evaluators if they want to take this approach for doing it well, and some things we need to be aware of to make sure that we don't replicate and repeat challenges or mistakes that have been identified and experienced by others?
I think my advice would be invest in the preparation for this, as we already said, but make sure there's a clear owner of this process. Make sure to involve everybody you think will want to have a say in this process, to make sure that when you start, everybody's on the same page. I think that would be my main advice.
My main advice would be, if possible, start with this when you are in a quiet situation, or when there is a certain openness to work on this. If there's full panic now because you have a lot of clients, you are really you have too much work, it's hard to start a process like this. So that will be an important one. And the other one, I think, which is important, which is also very much well described, I think, in our manual, is that also first collect individual experiences before doing group discussions, because otherwise you get this kind of group think very fast during a discussion. Are we doing well or not? So what we said is perhaps you can start with a questionnaire first to the people who can do this individually, and later on discuss this with the group, and then see how the different components in the room are leading to the best solution. One big don't is that never change the purpose of an evaluation after the evaluation. And this might happen sometimes, and something turns out to be worse than people thought. They say, well, we now, as a manager, we will go to the commissioning party and we ask for so much more money, and we put this evaluation out in the open where you first said you wouldn't go public, or like this kind of. So yes, perhaps the conclusion then is, if some things are really different coming out of the evaluation as you expected or hoped for, is a new evaluation to dive deeper into this, but then also be clear what you are going to do, what objective, and who's going to do that.
Maarten, Fenna, I'd like to really thank both of you for taking time today and sharing with us about the RAN Peer and Self-Review Manual and from your experiences, and to congratulate you. This is a very important resource and a step forward in the field that we hope through the video interview and through the podcast, we can help it to reach even more colleagues and agencies and practitioners in the field. Thank you very much for this time and for the work that you're contributing to the field.
Thank you very much. And if you allow me, we didn't mention our co-author, which is Milena Ullmann from Germany, who also contributed largely to this manual. Yeah. So the honor you just spread on us, for which I thank you gratefully, is also for her.
We will make sure that that gets shared widely, and when we're doing the introductions and also in the materials that will be shared from the video interview and the podcast, making sure to mention her as well.
Okay, super. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you both.